Well, thank you to all of you. And just to briefly recap what we've heard, first of all, starting with Michael, you now know that if you want a really sexy job in the 21st century, big data is it. And what big data is really all of data, or at least all of data on a particular question that we might want to pose. As Michael pointed out, lots of advantages to having these kinds of data sets in this field, particularly generating hypotheses to then go on and test through other than observational means, randomized clinical trials. Because if we don't do that, we run many, many risks of misinterpretation, confounding the garbage in, garbage out phenomenon of the wonderful example you used of the miscoding of men getting, I guess, obstetric care in the NHS. And also the judgment errors, errors around the tyranny of the average, as you said, assuming that because the average is what it is, that it means something for all patients. So as Michael said, the key question is what level of inaccuracy are we all willing to accept with these data and these analytics, or are we not going to accept that? Are we going to continue to exist on more rigorous data accumulated through randomized clinical trials? And as he pointed out, the FDA is among others that are still thinking their way through this, hoping that the science of observational analysis around these big data sets will evolve, but we're not there yet. So it may be sexy, but it's obviously going to have some risks involved in this field going forward as we work our way through this. We then heard from Mark that these kinds of data sets really, really matter for patients because they could pose a lot of new, helpful, useful information, but as we've heard, they could also pose a lot of not useful, dangerous information. So they really, really matter. And Mark's, I think, fundamental point was we're going to need more patients involved in generating these data sets through participation in trials, great willingness on the part of patients to do that. The examples he cited were really extraordinary. And an opportunity for the pharmaceutical and biotech sectors to engage with these far greater numbers of patients going forward. But we will need new rules of the road, new governance structures to basically make sure that we get to the end results and endpoints that we need. You heard from Rachel about what PCORI is up to in this realm, particularly building the research networks that it is now engaged in, and its long-term hope of really linking and leveraging the existence of electronic health record information, claims data, and other data that would be generated out of these research networks to really create these longitudinal data sets on patients that will really enable us potentially to answer questions about the effects of various treatments. You heard that PCORI is actually taking steps now to encourage randomization of patients at the point of care. So a way of generating these very large randomized clinical trials from the get-go, so we don't have to just be reliant on observational data, and the enormous work underway to fund these clinical data research networks and 18 of the patient-empowered research networks that will get us to the goal that Mark identified. And then we heard from David the enormous opportunities to use all of this to not only make healthcare better, but potentially also to make it cheaper and certainly more effective. And the capacities in terms of using these data in the pharmaceutical sector to understand more about what is going on with patients, how to improve adherence, et cetera. All of those opportunities are really extraordinary. And presumably we'll know many more important things than just the fact that people like to get strawberry Pop-Tarts and beer when hurricanes arise. That's a really interesting observation, and I guess it asks questions, really raises some questions about who we are as human beings, that's what we think of when hurricanes are coming. Be that as it may, let's start off by drilling down on a few of these issues, and then we'll hope to open this up to questions and comments from all of you. So this is a big, big task, and one of the particularly big tasks here is that we have a lot of individual large data sets being generated, but not enough linkage, it seems, going on among them. We don't even have true interoperability, David, among the EHR data that we're accumulating. We have a lot of work going on. Obviously, you mentioned the Sentinel and Mini-Sentinel work at FDA. PCORI is building these research networks. How are we going to link all of this together? Because what we clearly don't want is a bunch of different huge data sets sitting in silos. It would just seem to make even more risky the notion that we're going to make some poor judgments on the basis of these data. So Michael, let's start with you.
Well, I worry about the same thing, and I think, let's say if more than one organization or entity is asking the same questions, and we've all assembled our own big data sets, then you potentially have an apples and oranges problem when there are differences, and you can't resolve them. So I think that,
whose big data are right.
Yes, exactly. And is one data set flawed in some way and not the other? And so I think it would be very desirable to try to move as much as possible to a kind of common resource. The other thing I would say is that we, in the United States, we're very focused on the United States, but there are a lot of other countries in the world. Some of them are at least as advanced, if not more advanced, in the use of big data collection and and follow people for very long periods of time. And we would like to be able to, for one thing, assimilate all that data into databases when we're asking, and at the same time be able to look at the subpopulations, because it is possible that interventions will work differently in different racial, ethnic groups.
And as you mentioned, we've got Sweden collecting all kinds of registry data.
Right.
We've got the National Health Service making a big push into collecting its data, and yet we don't have these connections. David, take us and tell us about the connections to all of the data we're collecting now on EHRs and under meaningful use, and how we link all of that up.
Sure. So we've done, I would say, pretty well in terms of getting people to adopt electronic records. But as Susan has noted, interoperability or clinical data exchange has lagged behind. And I think the fundamental reason for that is that the main approach that we've taken is to invest in something called the Regional Health Information Organization, or RIO. And there are problems with the business case for RIOs. Most of the problems with data exchange are not technical. They're much more political. There are a few data exchanges that have been pretty successful. For example, the one in Indianapolis. But that's really the exception and not the rule. I'd say that things have gone a lot farther faster with research data sets, so with things like Sentinel and with I2B2 and so on. There are examples of people bringing together large amounts of data. The Office of the National Coordinator is very focused on trying to help us advance the ball around clinical data interoperability, but I would say we still don't have the exact key to figuring that out. One other point I would make is it's important to have data that are not just broad, but that are deep. And there's a lot of value to be gained if you have, for example, really good electronic health record data and the claims data and data about genetics and genomics and, for example, data about patient-reported outcomes, which Mark alluded to. And once you bring that all together, you might be able to do a better job at figuring out what results in better outcomes for patients.
Rachel, how is PCORI thinking about even linking up the data among these various research networks that it is attempting to generate?
Well, we're building on a lot of good work from the ARA investments that has gone on, sort of took place in the last five.
The stimulus bill.
The stimulus bill.
That enabled.
That's right. So a number of really exciting networks sort of sprung up around the country, and where our investment now is coming in is to really ask some of these systems to start figuring out some of the issues that remain in order for them to link together. And I think, as David was saying, I mean, there are definitely still technical challenges in terms of interoperability and standards, but there's a lot of cultural issues and organizational issues in, organizations being willing to share their data? Who's going to be able to query these databases? How is this resource going to be shared? So I think, I mean, we're aware that we have like a number of quite large challenges to work through, but our hope is in investing, in making this investment over the next 18 months, will bring people together to start really trying to figure out some pragmatic solutions to help the field move forward so that we do have this national resource that will help us, you know, in the end, provide better care to our patients.
David, Rachel, both of you have just raised this notion of the political constraints, political, cultural, whatever, not that these are some technical issues around standards of how you collect the data, but mainly political. Say more about that. What the heck is going on with all of us that we don't want to share our data?
Well, the NSA, I think, has had an effect on that. You know, this essay that Zach Kohani wrote the other day was actually was called "Why You Should Invite More Surveillance of Your Health Data," and he gave 4 or 5 really good examples of that. But I think it largely relates to to national concerns that we have about privacy. There are a number of individuals in Congress who've been very focused on that. There's talk about narrowing the privacy standards. If that were to happen, it could actually limit a lot of the benefits that we've been talking about here today. And we really, I think, need to have a societal conversation about how to manage this and how to get to where we want to go around it.
And the NSA issue may be a good catalyst for that conversation, because I think you're absolutely right. When you speak with young folks who are putting all their information out there, they don't really have the same perception of privacy. When you speak with people with chronic conditions, and Susan alluded to, my organization represents 133 million people with one or more chronic disease or disability in the United States alone. When you speak with those people and their family caregivers, they'll tell you, take all my data. We want you to make a better treatment. The perspective is very different. Privacy is not a hard and fast concept. It's a balance between trade-offs. And people with chronic diseases and their family caregivers are willing to trade a whole lot off to get better treatments, to get better care. And that conversation has never happened, because when you ask people, do you want privacy? Everybody says yes. When you put it in the context of trade-offs, people are willing to look at it differently. And we're seeing that with our security, we're seeing that with what we put into social media, and you're seeing that with our healthcare.
Michael, when we think about commercial companies that are gathering lots of data and sharing, we get into the question of proprietary interests potentially getting in the way. How big a factor do you think that's going to be? It's one thing to be compelled to give your data to the FDA for safety reasons, Sentinel. We could also gain a lot if there was some collaboration on the research end among companies who are all chasing insights into the same underlying health conditions.
So when we think about sharing clinical data, and we do it currently, and we undoubtedly will be doing more in the future, I would say number one priority for us is patient data, protecting the confidentiality of patients. Those patients have entrusted themselves to us. They've exposed themselves to an experimental drug. Without their permissions, you know, the chance that their confidential data might be made available, I think no matter what system we devise, is real. It doesn't mean we can't do it. We need to figure out ways to do it. So I would put that on the top of our list. Soon thereafter comes the protection of broadly defined intellectual property. And you know, if you want the new innovations, you need to be able to protect the intellectual property that enables it. And if you either inappropriately make that available or make that available too early, it has a chilling effect on people's willingness. People don't invest in order to give the data away at the wrong time. I think even that data, you know, it matures and it ripens, and sometime, usually after drug approval, much, if not all of that data would become available. But I think there's a less compelling reason for sharing that. And the one thing I would say is, you know, the experiment's kind of been done. We've heard from the EMA, which has posted a lot of data, that more than 80% of their requests to see data from clinical trials is from lawyers and competitors. So, you know, we have a vision that it's always going to be a investigator, a researcher who's has a set of intentions that I think we all identify with, but that's not actually always the case in the real world.
Isn't it the case, though, that we potentially could make some more headway faster if we had more minds working on some of these issues in tandem? I mean, that was certainly the experience with the Human Genome Project. It's the theory behind crowdsourcing.
Absolutely, and that's the reason to do it, and that's why we're looking for ways to do that while safeguarding the patient and safeguarding intellectual property.
Is it possible that there are those ways, do you think?
Oh, I do, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm actually confident that there are ways of doing it. I just think that they do need to be honored, and we have to figure out how to handle them. And I think kind of approaches which say, well, that's actually not important. In the end, we'll have another set of unintended consequences, which is certain areas people will say, well, it's, you know, it's too risky to go into such an area.
Can I chime in on that point? Actually, I think it's really important, and I completely understand the issues you're raising, and intellectual property. I think even in the patient community, we know you're not going to develop a medicine without a patent, and it needs to be a strong patent. But there are opportunities to improve that current system, because you absolutely have to have that predictability at the back end. But the challenge is the patents right now, in many instances, you can't get a patent for a really good medicine. In fact, as much as 80 to 90% of what comes out of NIH doesn't enter into a patent, or doesn't qualify for a patent. You could have a potential treatment for a severe form of cancer or Alzheimer's. Doesn't necessarily mean you get a patent. You have to meet the technical legal requirements to qualify for a patent. And the challenge of that is that you have a lot of potential medicines not being developed. So there is an opportunity to look at providing other mechanisms, and the patient community has spearheaded legislation that would address this in the unmet medical need space. The related issue is that currently, and this changed about 20 years ago, your patent runs concurrently when you file for getting your product approved with the FDA and start doing your clinical development and R&D. Challenge with that is, for an unmet medical need, if you want to show that you can slow or stop progression of the disease, that may take 12, 15, 13 years, which is running in tandem with your 20-year patent life. So you start to diminish the incentive to really go in that hard space. So there are opportunities through policy to address this, but your point of providing that certainty and predictability once you're approved is critical. So I think there's an opportunity to partner with the patient community to improve that system.
If you had to, each of you had to leave us with a big thought about what you hope will most happen in the field of big data in the years ahead, what would that be, each of you? David, let's start with you.
Well, I guess I would like to see the development of data sets that are truly deep, that include lots of different kinds of data, that let people opt in. And I think if we get data sets like that that are large, that an enormous number of new insights are going to emerge that will be really beneficial for the care that we all get.
Rachel.
I mean, I'm left with the thought that this is not an easy enterprise, that getting good evidence out of big data is something that's quite challenging. But if we get it right in terms of incentives for people to come to the table and do this work together, I think we can really push the envelope in the next 2 to 3 years to move the field from where it is right now. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic.
Mark.
At the end of the day, my hope for big data is that it translates into the development of new treatments that are accessible and actually meet the individual preferences and needs of patients.
And Mike.
Mine's very similar to Mark. I think we need innovation in every part of healthcare delivery. David spoke about that, but we really need new therapies, and it's my hope that we'll learn the pluses and the minuses of the data sets and their analytical methods to really speed bringing these new therapies, innovative therapies to patients.
Well, thanks to all of you for being big thinkers on this notion of big data and big contributors to advancing our understanding of it. We really are quite grateful and look forward to engaging in the future as we see the potential that all of you have discussed today emerge. So join me in thanking this panel for a terrific discussion.